So we finally have what we should have had at least 4 years ago, at least. A comprehensive accounting from a mainstream media venue of the lies, deceit, and recklessness that drove the corporate media's Russiagate hoax. On Monday, the Columbia Journalism Review, it doesn't get more mainstream than that, published a 4-part investigative series entitled, quote, "The Press versus the President." In one scathing paragraph after the next, it details the core incompetence and complete lack of journalistic integrity that drove most of the corporate media's coverage of Russiagate, the fake scandal that dominated and drowned our politics from mid-2016, when the Clinton campaign first launched its innuendo about sinister hidden ties between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, through April of 2019, more than 3 years later, when Special Counsel Robert Mueller finally closed his 18-month-long investigation by concluding that there was insufficient evidence to establish the 2 core conspiracy theories, deranged conspiracy theories, pushed by the Democratic Party, the U.S. security state, and the corporate media, and seemingly copied from the crustiest decades-old scripts buried in the lowest-level dungeons of the CIA. First, that Donald Trump and the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government to hack into the email inboxes of the Democratic National Committee and Clinton campaign manager John Podesta. And 2, that Russian President Vladimir Putin had effectively seized control of the levers of American power through various forms of blackmail control over Trump. One now often sees many liberals and media figures embarrassed that they actually endorsed that blackmail theory, first invented by the Steele dossier, which was also reported first by the media, by CNN and by BuzzFeed. Liberals now like to claim that this is something that was endorsed only by the most marginalized fringes of resistance politics, not by any influential or mainstream Democratic Party leaders. That, put simply, is a lie. That Donald Trump was a puppet of the Kremlin, that Putin had effectively taken over the United States by infiltrating its most sacred halls of power, was gospel to American liberalism at the highest levels for years. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as just one example, repeatedly spread it, as illustrated by this very predictably viral January 2019 tweet, quote, "What does Putin have on Donald Trump politically, personally, or financially?" When Trump met Putin for a summit in Helsinki in 2018, Democratic Party leaders, CIA operatives, and their corporate media allies actually began to resort to body language analysis, something less credible than astrology, to insist that they finally had the proof, because of how Trump was standing and how Putin was standing, that Trump was owned by Putin. One of the most prolific and casual liars in U.S. political life, former CIA Director John Brennan, now of NBC and NBC News, pronounced during the summit in one of the year's most viral tweets, quote, "Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors. It was nothing short of treasonous." Now remember, treason is one of the very few crimes punished in the Constitution with death. So Brennan, based on Trump's posture at this press conference in Helsinki, was accusing him of nothing short of high crimes and misdemeanors and treason. He then went on, "Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, where are you?" The covers of America's leading magazines, which constantly tell you that they are the guardians of truth and the bulwarks against disinformation, constantly entrench the most deranged version of this conspiracy theory, that the Kremlin had literally taken over the White House. The august, prestigious, sacred journal, The New Yorker, which was one of the leaders in deceiving Americans into believing that Saddam Hussein was in an alliance with al-Qaeda through the lies of its then star reporter Jeffrey Goldberg, who now leads The Atlantic, also served as ground zero for some of the most unhinged Russiagate conspiracy theories. In March 2017, less than 2 months into Trump's presidency, they published on their cover this art as an illustration showing iconic Moscow buildings hovering over the White House and beaming some sort of mind-controlling laser light into the center of it. The UFO-style Russian buildings and the menacing red sky was classic fear-mongering, like out of some straight-to-video terror film based on the fevered imagination of some banal B-level Hollywood scriptwriter who read one too many Tom Clancy novels. Remember, this is supposed to be the most serious news journals that you're supposed to trust and depend on to protect you from disinformation. On May 29th, 2017, just 5 months into the Trump presidency, Time magazine all but plagiarized that New Yorker cover by showing the White House being physically consumed by what the geniuses at Time mistakenly thought was the Kremlin, but was actually Moscow's iconic St. Basil's Cathedral. But the point was clear. Somehow, based on nothing but the totally unverified gossip rag called the Steele dossier, less journalistically reliable than a random subreddit thread, Russia had effectively taken over the United States. This is beyond the most deranged Cold War mania. And yet, it was all of this collective media paranoia, this hysteria, this insanity that built on itself and fed on itself until they were finding no limits of any kind, neither evidentiary nor ethical, as the very serious media competed with one another over who could top whom when it came to disseminating the most evidence-free conspiracy theories they could conjure, all fueled by the certainty that the more extreme they became, the more television time their journalists would get, the more retweets and likes and virality their magazines and newspapers would enjoy. And that's what made Monday's 4-part indictment of the corporate media's Russiagate misconduct so necessary, albeit very overdue. The parts of the U.S. media guilty of this malfeasance are reacting to this 4-part investigative series exactly the way they react to all revelations that they spread and ratified blatant falsehoods, by steadfastly ignoring it, pretending it doesn't exist. And what makes that particularly remarkable in this case is that the journalist who wrote this series is one of their own, Jeff Gerth, who worked for the New York Times as an investigative reporter for almost 30 years, from 1976 until 2005. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 1999 for, in the words of the committee, quote, a series of articles that disclosed the corporate sale of American technology to China, with U.S. government approval despite national security risks, prompting investigations and significant changes in policy. Before working at the New York Times for 30 years, Gerth worked for the 1972 presidential campaign of George McGovern, the left liberal candidate who lost in a landslide to Richard Nixon. But despite his obvious left-wing bona fides, he often earned the scorn of Democrats during his tenure at the Times, especially for his dogged reporting on the Whitewater and then Lewinsky scandals and his highly adversary posture toward the Clinton administration. This was back when the New York Times' attachment to one of the political parties was far less overt and even far less clear than it is now. Whatever else is true of Gerth, he is the classic and vintage mainstream media reporter, making it far more difficult for media corporations to ignore his incriminating reporting of their conduct, especially since it was published and vetted in the equally mainstream Columbia Journalism Review. As the article put it, quote, before the 2016 election, most Americans trusted the traditional media, and the trend was positive. Today, the U.S. media has the lowest credibility, 26%, among 46 nations. The lowest credibility among 46 nations. That is the United States media. In any other field, that would prompt a crisis, an immediate plan for self-reflection. But the U.S. corporate media simply does not care. So they're going to ignore this just like they ignore everything. And that's because these media outlets know that almost all of their remaining readership and viewership are partisan Democrats. Polling demonstrates that. They speak to and for Democrats, and that's it. And they know their Democratic subscribers and viewers don't mind when they lie in order to advance the interests of the Democratic Party. Indeed, they want them to lie for that cause. So there's no price to pay when they get caught, and there's no reason to retract their lies or even acknowledge the reporting that proves that they disseminated outright falsehoods. In reality, this reporting from Gerth and the CJR are 4 years late. This accounting should have happened when Robert Mueller, George W. Bush's former FBI... Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.